Hello, fellow music nerds. Welcome to Season 2 of the Music Makers and Soul Shakers podcast. I am your host, Steve Dawson, coming to you from the Hen House Studio here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a Canadian guitarist, songwriter, producer, and engineer, and I've been living and working here in Nashville for the last 4 years. A couple of years back, I decided to reach out to some of the amazing musicians, engineers, and producers I've met along the way to learn some of their more in-depth stories than what I'd been hearing elsewhere. So between March and August of this year, I'll be releasing a new conversation every Wednesday with someone who I feel has been involved with creating great recorded music. Feel free to reach out to me or leave comments at www.stevedawson.ca. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast for free on iTunes. Now, let's get down to another episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Greetings, fellow music nerds and listeners. Welcome to Music Makers and Soul Shakers Season 2. I'm glad you're back and ready to jump in with me to a whole new set of guests and interviews as we delve ever deeper into the mysterious world of music making. Thank you so much for listening and all your feedback that I've been getting. It's really appreciated to hear from so many people, and it helps to get motivated to do more of these shows for you. I'd like to thank my cohorts in Nerdville who help out with these shows, specifically Jeremy Holmes, who helps me with the research on a lot of the guests, and Michael Glusak, who is helping with some of the editing and music placement from his room at Berklee College of Music in Boston, my old stomping grounds. And as always, you can connect with me and the show at my website, which is stevedawson.ca. You can make comments there, and if you feel so inclined to contribute to the show with a donation of any sort, that's really the only way we have of keeping the show going. It's quite easy if you go to the website, and there's a podcast page, and there's links there. If you haven't done so already, please also head over to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast. It's free, and it helps to get the word out there. All right, well, let's get started. I like to think of the history of American roots music in a number of what I think of as zones, each one being a hot spot for a certain scene that kicked out a number of bands or artists at one time. In some cases, it's a studio like Motown or Stax, and in some cases, it's a city at a certain time. And Los Angeles, of course, has had many of those times. We explored some of that last season with some of my guests like Hal Blaine in the 50s and 60s, Joe Henry in a more modern era, and musicians like Jay Belleros as well. But there's another era that I find fascinating, and that is the LA of the early 1980s. And at that time, there was an explosion of great bands around that were rooted in blues and rock and roll and country, but they also had a punk rock edge and energy that defined them. I'm talking about bands like X, Los Lobos, the Beat Farmers, and the band that today's guest was in, the Blasters. Dave Alvin grew up in Downey, California, and has an amazing story to tell about growing up in that area and being around the last hurrah of the first generation of great blues and jazz artists. He got to see it all firsthand, and it seeped into his brain as he learned to write and play. Along with his brother Phil, Dave and the Blasters created a string of killer, energetic rock and roll records that are a vivid portrait of the LA that wasn't the focus of the mainstream at the time. Dave went on to record a number of great solo albums as well, and recently has collaborated again with his brother Phil on a couple of duo recordings. Most recently, their new album, which is called Lost Time. Make sure you go pick up your vinyl copy wherever records are sold. I had the good fortune of meeting Dave and getting a chance to work with him about 6 years ago or so when I was doing a tribute project to a string band that I love called the Mississippi Sheiks. And Dave was very generous and joined us up in Vancouver for a big blowout concert. It was great to hang out with him, and he had a terrific energy and brought so much to that night and that concert. And I'll never forget getting that chance to play with him and hang with him a little bit those nights in Vancouver. Dave still is out constantly touring on the road with his band The Guilty Ones, or sometimes doing duo shows with Phil, and recently he's also been out doing some duo shows with Jimmy Dale Gilmore. So make sure you go see him in whatever format you get the chance to. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Dave Alvin.
There's a town ahead that you've never seen. And maybe it's better.
Hey, is that Steve?
Yeah, it is, man. How are you?
I'm good, man. How's the connection?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. You're at home right now?
Yeah, it's going okay. You know, it's not too cold.
Yeah, it's a little freezing here, actually.
Yeah, I remember when I was attempting to live there, and then the weather changed. And in those days, I didn't have a car out there. And I took that as a sign to head back to California. You know?
I didn't know you ever set up shop here in Tennessee. Was that a long-term thing?
No one else knows either.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was there for about 3 months.
Oh, okay. That was enough for you?
Yeah, it was, are we interviewing or are we?
We're in, man. We're on. We're going.
Oh, we're on? Yeah, no, it was like it was 1989 or so.
Oh, yeah.
And, and I lived on a little condo on 16th or 17th.
Okay.
And yeah, it was me and a guitar player guy who was the caretaker of this little condominium building, you know, a little 2-story thing, house like.
Yeah.
But neither he or I. It was the low point of my life actually, and
really?
Yeah, neither he or I had any money, so I had an air mattress and $9 folding table from some Target kind of store.
Couple packs of smokes.
Oh yeah, that for sure. And I had a ghetto blaster, and we had 2 metal folding chairs, and that was all that was in that apartment, and you know, a couple of guitars.
Hey, what else do you need, man?
Yeah, kind of. And I'd walk every day over to my publisher's office and sit in the co-write room, and I'd co-write songs with some great writers, you know, Michael Woody, Leroy Preston, and some others, you know, and then a couple other writers like Mickey Jepp. We just decided, screw it, let's go drink beer, you know. But it was a weird time, you know, because
that whole co-write world doesn't really sound like something that you fit into all that well.
I do and I don't. You know, I've co-written with, you know, like about 6 or 7 songs with Tom Russell, which worked particularly well.
Yeah. And
I've written songs with other people. It's just, you know, what I realized when I was, you know, in Nashville was what had happened was Dwight Yoakam had recorded Long White Cadillac, a song of mine.
Yeah, right.
And so then the guys at my publishing company, Bug Music, they said, you know, you ought to go to Nashville. Now if you got a Nashville hit under your belt, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I had already been there a couple of years earlier when I had my first solo record released out of Epic Nashville, CBS Nashville. And so I had a vague idea of what the town was about. But I did it anyway because I was kind of at my wit's end. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, maybe I can write, you know, something that will make a lot of money, or a couple of things that will make a lot of money. And in that period of time, you know, the hottest ticket was to try to get a cover, you know, one of your songs covered by Randy Travis or George Strait were the 2 biggest stars.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, I sat around with some great writers and we wrote crappy songs, you know? And none of them got covered by George Strait or Randy Travis, to say the least. But yeah, once it started getting cold and I realized, you know, I'm pretty shy, so it's not like I'm out working it. you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm more the run and hide kind of guy.
The introvert.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. You know, if alcohol's involved, I'm an extrovert, but if there's no alcohol, I'm extremely shy. So
yeah,
when it started getting cold and I didn't have a car, and I just
that sucks, man.
Yeah, I just decided, you know, I don't belong here. They don't care whether I'm here or not. And I belong in California.
Yeah, I've been enjoying a lot your new collaborations with your brother again.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty wicked. So I'm just curious about how that's all going. You've made the Brunsey record, I don't know, 2 years ago maybe, and then you've got this new record out. It's such a great pairing, but I know that you guys have had a complex relationship, shall we say, over the years. And so I'm just wondering how that's all going these days. Like, are you planning to do a bunch of stuff with Phil, or is this like just something you're doing right now and then you're going back to solo, or what's the status with you and Phil?
Well, it's a little bit of both. We're gonna continue doing the Dave and Phil dog and pony thing, you know, and which I love doing. You know, it makes me very happy.
I love my tea, crazy about my Gordon's gin. When I get high now, baby, I just feel like floating around in the wind. You know, I feel so good. Yes, I feel so good. You know, I feel so good. I feel like balling a jack.
For the past 2.5 years or so, I've kind of let that side of my personality not disappear, but it took a back seat to playing with my brother. And part of the issue is when we worked pretty much nonstop, and when we weren't working, and say I'd get a week off or so, my brother actually would have to go out with his band, the Blasters, and play. And I just decided earlier this year, you know, it was kind of like, well, when we finish our gigs in November, you know, I'll give my brother a little break. I know the Blasters won't give him a break, but I'll give him a little break. So his health is still fragile, and you know, so I'm kind of in a catch-22 of, you know, I love playing with my brother. I love, it makes me giggle, you know.
Right.
And on the other hand, I don't want to kill my brother, you know.
You guys don't pound the shit out of each other every night anymore?
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, we only had one on both albums, both the Bill Brunsey Common Ground album and then the next one, the Lost Time album. We only argued once. And I hate to admit it, but my brother was right.
What was that about?
Well, we argued over this big Bill Brunsey song called How You Want It Done. And we argued over the correct way of playing it. And it was a little bit of the old days.
Yeah.
And just a little bit. And God damn it if he wasn't right, you know. And we were arguing over an F sharp note.
Lord, I ain't got time to pray. Now you could put me in the alley. My gal's name is Sally. You wake me up in the morning, mama, I still got that old habit. Why don't you tell me?
And I was saying that the F sharp wasn't important. And my brother saying, yes, it is. The F sharp sets up everything. And we argued back and forth. And then I finally kind of had to shyly and modestly, or not modestly, shyly and shamefully admit that, oh, yeah, you're right. You kind of do need the F sharp note in that run, you know. So
that's very big of you, Dave.
You know, the thing about the Blasters was we all grew up together,
right?
You know, including Lee Allen, the great New Orleans rhythm and blues tenor sax player. I'd known Lee since I was 13.
Okay.
So we had every single one of us grew up together, you know.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you know, when you're in a band with guys from your hometown, that are, it's basically a band of 5, 6 brothers,
Right.
So it wasn't just me and Phil going at it. It was, on Tuesday it would be the drummer versus the bass player. On Wednesday it'd be me versus the piano player. On Thursday it would be the piano player and me versus my brother. It's just, I have a great band. Lisa Pankratz on drums and Brad Fordham on bass and Chris Miller on guitar, and we don't argue about anything. And if I say, okay, we're going to do this with a slightly, calypso feel, they go, okay.
Yeah, that's good to have.
In a band full of hometown brothers, okay, we're going to do this with a slightly calypso feel. Go to hell, I'm not doing that, and how come the punches,
There was a cold wind blowing on the night we met. The windows were rolled up tight. We both asked for something we could never get. Now do the thing that's right. None of us is gonna cry. It wasn't even worth the try. So don't leave.
You guys are from Downey, California, and is that where everyone in the Blasters was from originally? Like, were you all in that town?
Gene Taylor is actually from the border of Downey and Norwalk.
Okay.
And his family had a little farm there back when there were still farms and stuff in that area.
Yeah.
And so Gene technically is a Norwalk guy, but technically he played with Downey guys, so that made him a Downey guy. He lived on the Downey side of the San Gabriel River.
Okay.
So yeah, he's a Downey guy. So yeah, we all grew up together, and then Lee Allen, he lived about, I guess, would be 5-6 miles away over in South Central LA.
How much older than you would he have been?
Lee was, when I met him, he was probably in his late 40s.
And you were a teenager or what?
Yeah, just like 13 years old, yeah.
And he's a legendary dude. Just like, what was he doing in Downey?
He wasn't in Downey proper. He was in South Central LA. He had left New Orleans. He did all the, for those of your listeners that don't know who Lee Allen is, he played the tenor sax solos on all the great Little Richard and Pat Stamina records out of
it's huge, man.
Cosimo,
huge.
Cosimo Matassa studio in New Orleans with Earl Palmer and everybody. And just about any record made in New Orleans from about 1955 to 1960, the tenor sax solos, Lee Allen. Mysterious circumstances, he had to leave New Orleans.
Okay.
And I think it involved a woman. And he moved to California. And so, it's a long story about how we all met, but we all met. My brother Phil and I were following around, literally following around the great blues shouter Big Joe Turner.
Yeah, man.
And because Big Joe was doing all these gigs, and this is about 1969. Big Joe was doing these shows with the Johnny Otis Orchestra, which at that time was just an amazing band, full horn section, the whole bit.
Well, you got a new way of loving, sure makes a man feel good.
So we followed him around like deadheads, but we were little kids.
Just around the LA area, or was it all over California?
Yeah.
What grabbed you about that band? Like, what was the thing that knocked you out about them that made you want to follow them?
Well, the band it was a real R&B review.
Yeah.
So you would have, first off, the band was great. I can tell you most of them. The only guy whose name I don't remember is the drummers. And but I can tell you, he was the drummer for a psychedelic band in the '60s called Kaleidoscope that David Lindley was.
Yeah,
in.
Lindley was in that, right?
Yeah, so it was the drummer from Kaleidoscope. Shuggy Otis was on guitar.
Nice.
The bass player was the hippest looking white guy I ever knew, named a guy named Shoop Bradshaw, who was both a great bass player and a great guitarist. And then it was Johnny Otis doing keyboards and vibes. The sax section was Preston Love. Big Jim Wynn would be playing baritone. Preston Love would be playing tenor. And a trombone player named Gene the Mighty Flea Connors. And then sometimes it would be augmented with Clifford Scott on tenor sax as well, who did the tenor sax on Honky Tonk by Bill Doggett.
Nice.
And so it was just a great band, and they had arrangements and everything. So it wasn't like a loose, like, oh, it's just the blues, man, play whatever.
Pretty rockin', right?
It was tight. It was a tight friggin' band. And so they'd come out, they'd do a couple songs, and they'd bring up, they had a great blues singer, female blues singer named Margie Evans. And she'd do like 3 songs, and they'd bring out a soul singer named Delmar Mighty Mouth Evans, no relation to Margie. And then they'd bring out Eddie Cleanhead Vincent, who was a sweetheart of a man. Yeah. And then there would be Big Joe Turner. And this is Big Joe when he was still standing. He wasn't, all these guys were still in their prime. They were at the tail end of their prime, but still in it. And then after Big Joe would be T-Bone Walker.
Was T-Bone playing with the full band, the full horn section, everything as well?
Oh, yeah. It was just it was the same band for everybody. It was the Johnny Otis Orchestra. Then they'd bring up everybody one by one. And
would they play every night? Like, were you seeing these guys on a nightly basis?
Pretty much.
Man, that's college and high school and elementary school all in one.
Yeah, when I was about 13, I got to see Jimi Hendrix twice.
Wow, where was that?
Well, one was at the Devonshire Downs Pop Festival, what they called the Newport Pop Festival, which was strictly a jam. It was Jimi Hendrix with a pre-band of gypsies. He had some kind of bad experience the night before at this festival with the experience. Okay. And then he just came back to make up for whatever the bad experience was and play for an hour and a half. And at the same time, the Electric Flag were supposed to play, but Mike Bloomfield had quit like 2 days before. Oh, no. So it was like Buddy Miles was playing drums. It was the horn section from the Electric Flag. I think it was Harvey Brooks on bass.
Yeah, sure.
So anyway, and then the next gig, I saw him like 3 months later. He played with Jimi Hendrix played with Mitch Mitchell on drums and Billy Cox on bass at the Forum.
Okay. Right, I know that era, yeah.
I had seen that, and that, seeing Jimi Hendrix changed my life, in a variety of ways. But then following that up with seeing Big Joe Turner and T-Bone Walker with a full rehearsed orchestra.
Yeah.
That wasn't just a throw together jam thing of guys that could barely play. I mean, this was the shit,
Right. Yeah. That's incredible.
You see those two different approaches to playing the blues, and it just changed your life, So. And then when you realize, Big Joe Turner doesn't live that far away from us. And so you could see him, say, on a Friday or Saturday night at a place called the Ash Grove, where they'd be playing in front of 300 people, jammed into that club. And then on the Wednesday night, you could go to a place like the York Club, down on Central Avenue in Florence, around in there, and see either you can see Big Joe Turner singing to 30 people at a bar.
Yeah.
And
just so like he would do solo shows as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, this was the tail end of that kind of music. That kind of urban or jump blues, urban blues kind of thing,
Yeah.
was still community music. It wasn't museum music. It was community music. There were still people in the community going out at night. This music spoke to that community, you know.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't like a relic, even, you know.
Right.
It was, you know.
It was vital. It was happening.
Yeah, it was still happening. You know, like I said, these guys were the tail end of their prime, but they were still in their prime. And you know, when you saw Big Joe Turner stand and sing, and all the gestures and articulations that he would do, and with his hands and with his arms and with his eyes, and the way he would sway his body a certain way, you know, these were all, for lack of a better word, these were entertainments.
Yeah,
he was entertaining people, and but also just the sheer physical power of the man. And then back that up with a great band like Johnny Otis had, and it's just like, wow, you know,
deadly.
And it was really, you know, when I saw Jimi Hendrix, it was like, this is music from another planet.
Yeah,
you know, this is. But when I saw Big Joe Turner with the Johnny Otis Orchestra, it was like, you know, this is music from the earth.
Right.
And, you know, it might be an industrial earth, but it's earth, but it's earth nonetheless. And that's what I want to do.
Like at that point when you're 13 and you're seeing all this crazy shit and it's blowing your mind, were you were you listening to stuff along those lines before that? Or was that kind of your introduction to blues and rock and roll?
No, we've been listening to that stuff all of our lives. We had older cousins. My brother Phil and I had older cousins that were into a variety of musics. My cousin JJ lived out on a ranch in northwest San Fernando Valley. He grew up on a horse ranch, and so he liked, you know, Buck Owens and George Jones, things like that.
Did you guys respond to the country stuff as well? Like, at that point, were you into like?
Yeah, to an extent. Okay. I'm talking about when we were little kids.
Right. Okay.
You know, little kids. Yeah, we didn't know names of music. Okay. You know.
Yeah.
You didn't know. Well, that's Bakersfield Sounder. You know. So we just like, you know, when you're a kid, you respond to the song.
Right.
Or the performance of the song. You don't respond to the genre. You know, like.
Yeah.
A lot of people say, well, I only like country music, or I only like heavy metal, or this, that, and the other. When you're a kid, you don't know the difference. So anyway, then we had our cousin Donna, who was she was a rock and roller R&B chick, as she would say, and she would give us she had some great records, and then when she got tired of them or whatever, she'd give them to us.
Nice.
So through her, you know, and like we were getting Big Joe Turner records.
Okay, so you'd heard him through that,
and Ray Charles records and doo-wop records, and then our cousin Mike was a folkie, and he played banjo and he played guitar, and he loved, you know, everything from Ramblin' Jack Elliott and Dave Van Ronk to Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee and things like that. So, yeah, so we'd been exposed to it. So by this time, we had a concept of what was blues, or you know, what various types of styles fell under the blues umbrella. And at the same time that we were sneaking into bars, following Big Joe Turner around, you know, as little kids, you know, you could also occasionally sneak into a honky tonk. And there used to be where we grew up, there was a lot of great honky tonks. There was the Tumbleweeds and Bell Gardens, where my Wynn Stewart used to play. And, you know, my dear late friend Chris Gaffney remembers his old man taking him into the bar as a little kid, setting him on the bar, and then his old man would go up and sing with Wynn Stewart's band, you know.
Wow. That's cool.
And but his old man would get up and sing "My Funny Valentine."
Right.
You know?
Little change of pace.
Yeah, and then there was a whole strip of honky tonks out there. There was the Foothill and Signal Hill, which was the Grand Dame. There was the Nashville, what was it called? Nashville West or Nashville Beach, where Greg Lease used to play. The great steel player. Greg used to, in his early days, was in the, you know, would get gigs playing pedal steel at that place. There was the Blue Bayou in Bellflower, California. There was
These places are all live country music 7 nights a week at that point.
Yeah. So, you know, you could sneak in and see that. You know, so where we grew up, Downey, you know, is in the southeast part of LA County.
Yeah.
And the thing that was great about that was that was where, you know, for lack of a better term, that's where the workers lived. You know, it wasn't movie stars and swimming pools. It's where the people that came both from the Dust Bowl diaspora from the 30s to the Midwest from the South. So you had all these, you know, plus, you know,
pretty working class.
Yeah, plus you had, you know, you could go see a great Norteño band. You know?
Yeah.
So you had all these people that brought their music with them.
A los Estados Unidos escogían la medianoche como si fueran bandidos y al regresar los mataba, luego los echaba al río.
So at that point, were you playing guitar and stuff, or had you not really started yet?
I hadn't started. My brother started. You know, I would beat on it. I would beat on guitars. You know, we had a couple laying around the house, but you know, my cousin Mike was pretty good on the guitar and the banjo. My brother got pretty good right away. My brother has got the right kind of brain. For finger picking, and my brother became a pretty good finger picker in sort of the Blind Boy Fuller, Blind Blake kind of approach. A little, you know, the little Gary Davis thrown in.
I met a gal, I couldn't get her off my mind. I met a gal, I couldn't get her off my mind. She passed me up there, she didn't.
Was he pretty interested in getting it like really accurate and correct, or was it more of a feel thing for him?
It depended. Phil was also, he picked up harmonica real quick, and when he was like 14, he took lessons from Sonny Terry.
Really?
And so his harmonica playing was better than his guitar playing. And he was one of those guys that was, you know, he had the Fender Pro amp. He, you know, found a Fender Pro amp and an old, you know, microphone like little Walter would use. And so when he was a teenager, that was kind of his deal, was, you know, was being, you know, little Walter, Sonny Boy Williamson. And he can still do it. He doesn't like to do it because there's so many harmonica players now, you know.
Right.
So he likes to keep his harmonica playing to a minimum. Where I, on the other hand, push him to play harmonica because
you know he's a badass.
He's a tasteful badass on harmonica. And you know what happened was when he died 3.5 years ago, and you know he died over in Valencia, Spain, and we don't know how long he was dead. He was dead at least 10 minutes.
What brought that on? Was it an aneurysm or something?
He'd gotten a staph infection called MRSA, which is deadly.
Oh, yeah.
And he wound up in the hospital in Downey. And then when they let him out of the hospital, they gave him these antibiotics. And I'm not kidding or exaggerating. They were cans, because MRSA is so deadly and insidious. They were cans of antibiotics. As big as, you know, those Foster beer cans, those Australian beer. I'm not kidding. They were that big.
And brutal.
Yeah, and he had to inject them 2 times a day, and keep these cans of antibiotics in the refrigerator. So it kind of looked like. But what happened was, so then he had to do that for like 2 months after he got out of the hospital, and it killed all the MRSA, killed the staph infection. The sad thing was it killed everything else. You know, it killed the bad stuff and it killed the good stuff.
Right.
So what happened was he went on tour to Europe. He had an impacted tooth, and the poison inside the impacted tooth then spread through his throat. And long story short, it basically swelled up and made it impossible to breathe. and he was slowly on this tour having more and more trouble breathing. And then one night, he was literally on stage and he couldn't breathe.
Holy shit.
And so then they rushed him to the hospital, and he died. And so to bring him back to life, they had to do a tracheotomy to get air back into his lungs, and then this Spanish doctor named Dr. Mariela Anayas Cifuentes, this beautiful, beautiful woman doctor, got on top of my brother and beat the living shit out of him till his heart started beating again.
That'll do it.
Yeah, and I always wanted to do that. Why couldn't I be the one to do that? Why did I have to be 8,000 miles away? I would have loved to beat the shit out of my brother.
So how did you go from being like a fan and listening to old records and seeing and following Big Joe Turner around and that whole scene? How did you get into playing and like you and Phil at some point must have gone, hey, we should start a band, man? Like, what was that process like?
Well, it was long. He always had, from the age of about 13 or so, he started his first band. The area we grew up in, for whatever reason, had a lot of great musicians and a lot of great guitar players, like intimidatingly good guitar players. There was there was a guy named Mike Roach, and but then he took too much mescaline and wound up in an insane asylum. Shit. But he was friggin' brilliant, and he had a '56 gold top Les Paul. He was handsome, and late girls loved him. Then there was another guy that was named Gary Massey who grew up in Watson. Gary could do T-Bone Walker almost better than T-Bone Walker could. So there was all these great musicians, and so my brother always had a band, and the musicians were always good. And then, make a long story sort of short, this woman named Mary Franklin, who had been a blues singer back in the glory days of the Central Avenue in the 40s and 50s, she started managing my brother's band, and through that was how we met Lee Allen, and and then Big Joe Turner and T-Bone Walker would be giving the band lessons.
Well, that's how people were back then with bands. Like it was a real gig, right? To like whip people into shape and not let people slack off and get them tight, right?
And she made the band do things like, they had to have suits. They had to wear suits and look nice, and they had to, there would be no, in those days, if you were a white blues band, that meant 20-minute songs, and there was none of that.
Right.
And the rule, I remember Marcus schooling my brother and the guys, and that people can't dance for 20 minutes. 4 minutes at the most.
Right. What tunes were they playing? Were they doing like T-Bone Walker tunes and stuff like that, or was it?
Yeah, everything from T-Bone Walker and Big Joe Turner. Again, some of the songs on these records are what they were doing. Feel So Good, the Big Bill song, Just a Dream. They would be doing that Big Bill song, Just a Dream I Had on My Mind.
Yeah, I love that too.
They'd be doing Hide and Seek, which is on the Lost Time album, and Wee Baby Blues, which is on the Lost Time, right? So it was all that kind of stuff, plus Little Walter and Muddy Waters.
Don't stand no cheating, my baby. Oh, no.
What kind of stuff were you learning, or were they learning from the older guys that were around, like Lee Allen and these guys that were hanging out? Like, what kind of things were they teaching them?
Basics,
Yeah.
Part of it was what I was just explaining, was how to present yourself, this, that, and the other, and old school stuff. Some of which was valuable, some of which was not. Lee Allen, when he was in the Blasters, used to, and in those days I wrote the set list for the band, and I remember one time Lee gave me, now David, here's what you got to do, is whatever the single was, we'll say I'm Shakin'. We had some success doing this little Willie John song called I'm Shakin', and Lee would say, now that's your single, so what you do is you come out and you open with that and you end with that. And then when you do the encore, you come out and play it again. Because that's your single. You're trying to get people to leave And you know, you think back to those days when he was touring with Fats Domino or whomever.
That's how they do it.
Yeah, that's true. That was the rule. Yeah, you know,
Right,
I mean,
right.
you know, and I was trying to say, well, it's different now, Lee. And he's like, David, don't tell me I'm wrong. You know, so there was things that you know, and Lee, you know, because there were so many guitar players in our neighborhood that were great.
Yeah.
I decided I would do the opposite. You know, if you want to get invited to the jam sessions, you're not getting invited if you're a guitar player. I decided that I would play tenor sax and flute.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so
Okay.
then I even took lessons from Lee, and
Okay.
I'll never forget Lee Allen's. You know, there's a couple of good stories. You know, one was he was saying, "Now, David, and I'm like 15 at the time, and I'm honking away trying to trying to play like Lee." As well as, you know, trying to figure out giant steps, you know. So I'm all screwed up in my head. And I remember Lee saying, well, David, what you do is you do about 10 minutes where you practice your scales. Take a break, have a cigarette, read the newspaper, then go back, practice your scales for 10 minutes, take a break, smoke a cigarette, watch TV, then go back, you know. And I just loved it. 15 years old. Yeah, okay, all right. Practice scales, smoke cigarette. You know?
You're a chain smoker at 15, thanks to Lee Allen.
Exactly.
How far did you get on the sax before you graduated to guitar?
I didn't suck entirely. I was better at flute. Flute I was pretty good at.
Really?
Yeah, one, it was lighter, you know. And but you know, I sucked acceptably at saxophone. But Lee Allen at one point just said, you know, David, maybe saxophone is not your instrument.
Really?
And that set me towards guitar.
Okay.
And so anyway, so there were all these great musicians, this and the other. But then everybody either started winding up in jail, or a couple of guys died. You know, the one guy I was talking about wound up in an insane asylum.
Right.
And so, long story short, I was the last guy left.
Okay.
And my brother had a little blues R&B combo going with James Harmon.
Oh, great.
And James bought me my first electric guitar. He bought me a 63 Fender Mustang.
Beautiful.
That's a pawn shop in Santa Ana, California for like $70. And it had Schecter pickups in it. It was kind of hot rodded.
Yeah.
And it had a weird, one of those weird Fender, somebody told me they used to call them Friday afternoon special necks that wasn't quite a Mustang neck.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah.
And, you know, there's some guy in the you know, assembly line going, well, let's put this neck from that over here, you know.
It's Friday, man.
And so I was the last guitar player left, and my brother and James had kind of come to a disagreement because James wanted to continue just doing, you know, pure kind of shuffle harmonica blues, and my brother was trying to do Jackie Wilson songs and things like that, and, you know, and expand the definition of what blues was. That little combo broke up, but Phil and Bill Bapin then started this band. And like I said, I was the only guitar player left.
So how long had you been playing for at that point? Like how?
Seriously, I didn't start seriously playing guitar until about 10 years ago. So
But meanwhile, it seems like you'd sucked in all this stuff because, like, when I hear you play, you've got all that shit down, like all the blues vocabulary, all that, you know, you're pulling from T-Bone, you're pulling from all that stuff. So obviously, like, I don't know if you went through a period of like serious woodshedding or if it just kind of like came from just playing a lot of flipping gigs.
It was both.
Yeah.
You know, I would do the thing was I'd watch guitar players when I was a kid and then grab a guitar and try to duplicate it. Right. So that meant anybody from T-Bone Walker to, you know, Delta/Chicago guys like Johnny Shines. You know, we used to see, you know, it's a long story, but Johnny Shines was a brilliant singer and a brilliant guitar player. Yeah, we'd see him a bunch. He'd play the Ash Grove, and we would, sit front row.
Right.
And just stare at his, I'd stare at his fingers and see what he was doing. And then you race home and try to duplicate it.
Right.
I figured if everything went well, I could maybe get a job at the Fontana Steel Mill.
Okay.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
My brother worked in the Fontana Steel Mill slag pit for a while when he was a teenager.
Oh, that'll make you never want to work a job like that again, I bet.
Yeah, that kind of wrapped up his life in the steel mills. Kind of ended in the slag pit. But I thought, if worse comes to worse, I can always get that. But of course, little did I know that all those jobs would be gone and the factory torn down and this, that, and the other. But yeah, I never considered it a real thing, a reality. To me, songwriters or guitar players, if you're, Bob Dylan wasn't from Hibbing, Minnesota. Bob Dylan was from Mars. And it took me a lot of, study in a variety of areas, both literature and music and this and the other to realize, everybody is from somewhere, and I had some great poetry professors that, where I learned you could write about Taco Bells.
Right.
And it's okay, you don't have to pretend to be Shelley or Byron.
Right.
And, or Allen Ginsberg, you can just write about the friggin' Taco Bell on the corner. And that was a big step. And that's where in my brain, all of it started coming together. And I started thinking, well, maybe I can write songs that are kind of like the poetry I read, the small press, kind of avant-garde, yet, sort of, there were certain writers, poets that I loved, like Charles Bukowski and Gerald Laughlin, and writers like that. I saw the blues in their writing. Yeah, and totally. I saw, okay, here's how I can interpret. Here's how I can put my worlds together. Yeah. And so anyway, so my brother needed a guitar player. They're starting this band. He was stuck with me. We played a wedding. We played this wedding, and it was magical. It was just like, it clicked instantly. And part of it was my brother's approach to guitar playing was, again, it was pre-war. Yep. Pre-World War II. He was a rag blues kind of picker.
Was he pretty much uninformed by contemporary stuff? Was it more like 40s?
No, he
30s,
knew
40s?
it. He knew it, but his approach to guitar playing was, he didn't play B.B. King stuff.
Right.
He didn't play, Magic Sam stuff.
Okay.
He had the records and everything. I mean, he could play it. You hand him a guitar and say, play like B.B. King. Yeah, he could do it, but that's not where his leanings were.
I gotcha. That complements those two styles.
Yeah, it does. Sometimes it clashes, but in general, at this gig, it was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And I remember at the end of the gig, my whole body just kind of like going, I want to do this forever.
That's cool.
And I don't, I was working as a fry cook, and I just thought, I don't want to do that. I want to do this.
Right.
And that's where the Blasters were born, at that gig, where it's just like,
wicked.
There was something, years later after I left the band, Nobel laureate Bob Dylan and I were having a conversation, and both of us were feeling no pain. And so Bob Dylan says to me, so Dave, when are you and your brother getting back together? That was magic, and I said, why don't you go be in a band with your brother, Bob? And he says, my brother's a genius. If he had a band, he wouldn't have me in it. But there was a magic about the two Alvin brothers playing together.
At what point did you pick up that role of being like the primary songwriter in the bunch?
Well, I had studied poetry in my checkered college career, and I had some great teachers that made us write. You could write all the free verse you wanted, but what they would do every week was, okay, I want a sonnet. I want 2 sonnets. And I had to learn. I had no idea what iambic pentameter was. I had no idea what syllable count was. I had no idea what a sonnet was, so I had to learn. And so by these teachers forcing us to write in poetic forms, it suddenly clicked in my brain. Oh, a blues is just a sonnet. It's just a form.
Right.
You know, it's not a guitar solo. It's not a harmonica solo. The blues are a poetic form.
Yeah.
And once you learn that these poetic forms, whether it's sonnet or haikus or alexandrines or the blues, you can then
communicate in that language.
You can mess them up.
Right.
You know, so instead of a 12-bar blues, you can write a 16-bar blues. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you have to kind of have an idea. So I had studied that stuff, and so we made a demo tape that was mainly us doing like little Junior Parker songs or Howlin' Wolf songs and Carl Perkins songs and Magic Sam song, you know, things like that. And we were trying to take it around to clubs and record labels, you know, little independent labels, and trying to get a deal to at least make 145 or something, you know, to capture this. And we wound up at the home of this guy named Ronnie Weiser, Rockin' Ronnie Weiser, who had a little independent rockabilly label called Rollin' Rock. Mm-hmm. And he listened to the cassette, and he said, you know, I'd love to do a record with you guys, but you need original material. And so we had a band meeting after that, and we said, okay, next week everybody bring in 1 or 2 songs.
Really?
You know, yeah. And so then
it was
we said, okay.
It was an internal challenge.
Yeah, and like I said, I had been writing songs in my head since childhood. You know, driving my mother insane as she drove the car. I would just sit in the car and make up songs as we drove along.
Yeah. And
so anyway, so we met a week later, and I brought in 2 songs and nobody else did. so Dean, you're the songwriter.
Do you remember what the songs were?
Yeah, it was a song called American Music and a song called I Don't Want To. One of them's good.
Were they the first 2 songs you ever wrote?
No, but they're the first 2. I'd written, like I said, I'd been singing songs in the car.
Yeah.
From 4 years old on.
But like fully formed though, like were they the first?
Yeah,
ones
no, these were the first. I had sat down. I'd had a shitty band before I played with my brother, with some friends, and we called ourselves the Murderers, and which is what we did to music, and yeah, I'd written a couple of things for them, and so I kind of, you know, one song in particular was kind of was the first time I you know, was like, you know, I figured out theme, verse, bridge, chorus, theme, you know, that kind of thing. And so so they weren't the first songs I wrote, but they were the first I wrote for the Blasters, and they were the, you know, like I said, one of them was good, one of them, the other one was, you know, workable.
American music, they want to hear that sound right from the USA.
At that point, did you start churning them out like on a pretty regular basis? You realized there was an outlet, and
yeah, slowly. You know, I'm a slow writer.
Okay.
But about a week and a half later, I came in with Marie and a song called Flat Top Joint.
Holy shit! How old were you at this point?
Well, like 22.
At that point, like I'm sure it's evolved for you, but like what was your writing process in those early days where you're probably struggling a bit with just like musically putting things together? Like were you an all at once kind of guy, or were you chipping away at things, and were you writing lyrics first?
You know, it depends. To this day, it's the same thing. It just depends. Uh-huh. I've had them come fully formed, and I've had to pull them out of the mouth of, you know, I had to pull the song tooth, you know, out of the mouth with pliers, you know. So it you know, for me, it's just whatever. With the Blasters stuff, the challenge was, you know, we were basically, when all is said and done, Blasters were basically just sort of a blues R&B band. Some of the guys would be happy just playing blues and R&B to this day. Yeah. On the other hand, we kind of realized, we need to have original songs, but I knew what these guys would play and what they wouldn't play. For example, I didn't come in with a polka.
Right.
Yeah, no, this would be cool, you know.
Yeah, so you're writing stuff kind of geared towards the ensemble, which is super cool.
Yeah, and it was also we were also into so much blues/roots music at that point.
Yeah.
That a song like Marie Marie, you know, I kind of, you know, that one came, the melody and everything came, I was taking a nap.
Really?
And I woke up from the nap and I had this song go through my head and I grabbed the guitar and I started, you know, figuring out, okay, this goes here, you know.
Yeah.
But I had no idea what the song was about. I had no lyrics. I just had this thing in my skull.
Uh-huh.
And the melody, you know, was kind of a Cajun melody, but I was kind of thinking also of a guy like a Louisiana blues guy like Lazy Lester, you know.
Right.
So somewhere between like the Ballfoot Brothers, you know, the great Cajun acoustic family group, or a Louisiana Excello record, you know, like by Lazy Lester. And then a couple days later, we had a rehearsal, and so about an hour before the rehearsal, I was like, God, I really want to play this thing with those guys. I need some lyrics. And yeah, I wrote I remembered this. I remember a couple of things. Kind of as a kid, I remember, you know, where we grew up, there was still rural pocket, you know. And I remember being in my parents' car, driving to some friend of theirs, and we went through this patch of rural California, and there was a girl sitting on the porch of an old beat-up Victorian in the sunset playing guitar, and that image just stuck with me from childhood. And for some reason, while I was kind of trying to come up with lyrics, I just thought of this girl playing the guitar on the porch, and I was like, okay, what's this about? You know, what happened there? And so I wrote that. That's kind of, you know, I just wrote it down in like an hour.
What about a tune like Dark Night, which I've always loved, and it's kind of like an evocative, but still like rock and roll tune at heart, and it's kind of like, it kind of pulls from Chuck Berry in that way, I think, where there's a real, you know, story and mood that gets evolved out of kind of a basic form, but like you're kind of stretching it out and doing all this cool stuff it's like deceptively simple. How, like with a song like that, did you have to struggle with it at all, or was it
a little bit one? Just because by that point I had, you know, by the time I wrote Dark Night, you know, I'd already written some songs that quotation marks had social consciousness to them, you know. And you know, I wouldn't come right out and say things. I didn't write songs like, you know, go to hell, corporations. You know, I didn't write anything like that. But I would, inside all my songs to this day, they're, you know, I'm telling stories for a reason. And so, you know, as far as story songs go, you know, to me, the two ultimate are El Paso by Marty Robbins, and Memphis by Chuck Berry. The two ultimate story songs, you know. And so I always kind of worked within, you know, I always liked that. Yeah. And so with Dark Night, there had been some shootings, interracial shootings going on, and so that's why I wrote that song, you know. Okay. And it's basically was, you know, let's write a blues song about this, but, you know, how do we do it, you know? Part of the trick when you're a songwriter is, you know, what to leave in and what to leave out. maybe there's one or two of my songs where I left too much in, and maybe there's one or two where I should have added more. Who knows? But, certain songs, like Marie Marie, or something like that, it tells you everything and it tells you nothing.
Yeah.
And so if you can balance
which is
that,
part of the great mystery about a song like that, I think.
Yeah, the song of mine, 4th of July, is pretty popular down here. I don't know how popular it is in Canada or England or anything, but it's pretty popular here. But yeah, that was a song that when I wrote it, I just thought no one else on earth will understand this song. But to me it says everything, but it's so vague in some ways. And no, that's one of the ones people have latched onto over the years. It's like, so you never know.
What about a song like King of California? Like who is influencing that side of your songwriting, would you say?
Oh, well, that goes, that goes back to, folk music and all that,
right.
old, I like, one of the charms of, or enticements of old folk music, the real stuff, is the editing process that happens, and, whereas a song like Blackjack David or Blackjack Davy, I recorded that. And, that when it first started being composed by some guy in England or Scotland, in the Highlands or wherever, in the borderlands, wherever it was first composed, by the time it reached, let's say, by the time it went from Leeds or Durham in the north down to, I don't know, by the time it hit London, it had already morphed in a million ways, and verses had been left out. And, and by the time it, first got recorded in the 1920s, say 100 years after it was written, it had already taken on this whole other life.
Yeah.
And I always liked that about folk songs.
Right.
People edited out verses, they edited out things that weren't, appropriate for them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you get the great ambiguity of folk music. With King California, I was trying to capture that, a little bit, but also it's a little more straightforward of a story.
Yeah.
But there is that moment, to me, the moment that, I'm going to sound egotistical here, but the moment that gives me chills every time I sing it is the last verse where, okay, I'm dying, but I'm coming back to you somehow, and I like
man.
that.
Yet I still recall your tender kiss. Though this bullet in my chest is burning, oh my darling dear, please shed no tears. 'Cause I think that it's fair to warn you that I return to claim your hand. The King of California.
So you're armed with a batch of tunes. Can you just tell me a bit about your early experiences in the studio? Like, was American Music, was that the first time you'd really done a record?
The album American Music on Rollin' Rock, none of us had ever really made a record before.
So what was that whole session like? And was it like intimidating and weird or anything?
It was 2 days in a garage. Rock and Ronnie had a home studio in his garage.
Okay.
And we spent 2 days in there with several cases of beer.
Yeah.
And it was great. We cut, I guess, 24 songs.
Yeah, man.
In that period, and it was everything from original songs of mine to Magic Sam covers and Hank, Howlin' Wolf cover and Sonny Burgess, a lot of stuff,
right.
that didn't make the final record. So that was a thrill. That was like injecting methamphetamine directly into your veins. It's just like, we're making a record, especially because you think you're never making another one.
Right. I mean? Better enjoy it,
and,
man.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I still have that feeling to this day of,
you do,
well,
right?
this might be it. This might be the last record, So we were pretty high, both on the beer, but also the rush of rush of recording and hearing yourself back. And, Ronnie kind of dropped the ball as far as sonically for us.
You think?
He didn't have, oh, hell yes. he screwed up. He didn't get the bass right. You know, some of the Rolling Rock records sound great. Ray Campy's records that Ray Campy did on the label, and Matt Curtis and some of the other old-time rockabilly guys that recorded for Ronnie. Their records sound great. Now ours sounds kind of, like I said, he didn't get the bass right.
Yeah, that's important. That's really important.
Yeah, it's kind of part of the band.
Was Ronnie engineering that record?
Yeah.
Or was there? Okay. And you were tracking it pretty live, obviously, right?
Oh, totally live.
Totally
four
live.
guys in a garage. 1, 2, 3, go. You know.
Yeah.
And no, it was great.
It's the real rock time and play it in the real gone way. Well, it's the real rock time anywhere, more, and we keep picking up flints to the floor. Got a little shop man, you got to be alive, 'cause the joint's really jumping through the real rock time, and I'm gone.
Were you guys getting hung up at all about tones and things like that, or was it just like set up and get your sound as you normally do and go?
We should have been more concerned about tones. I think we were more concerned about is there still beer? Maybe we should go get more beer. It's kind of more what we were concerned about. We you know, Ronnie dropped the ball sonically. We dropped the ball sonically, and it took us. You know, recording roots music is a really treacherous thing.
Yeah.
Because it's just hard. You know, roots music of any type is meant to be played to an audience.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, there are exceptions to that, but in general, you're playing to get people to dance or people to cry or whatever, and you kind of need that feedback from the audience to make it magic. But on the other hand, it took me years and years to learn how to record. You know, because you walk into this studio, and the studio, you know, especially later on with the Blasters, you know, we started working in state-of-the-art studios.
Yeah.
And that's intimidating, you know.
Yeah, it is.
And then there's that whole thing, you know, of guys. Again, we were ignorant of certain things, and you know, the drummer, Bill Bateman, great drummer, but you know, we would be in the studio and they'd set up the mics and he'd play to get a drum sound, and then he'd come in and listen and go, "That's not what my drums sound like." And then you realize he's hearing it from where he's sitting, right?
Yeah.
And you know, he doesn't understand this, and we would go through hours and hours and hours wasting studio time to try to get the drums to sound like what it sounded like from where he sat. You know, down to we would put a mic above his head.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. A lot of people do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and you know, and then we do things like we would bring in, you know, we had, you know, you work with a lot of modern engineers, and sometimes the vocabulary, both the verbal vocabulary and the musical vocabulary are different. So you got a guy that you know grew up listening to Dark Side of the Moon. And then, you know, we're coming in and trying to play him Atlantic Records by Big Joe Turner, saying, "Can you make us sound like this?" You know?
Yeah.
And most guys can't. You know, it's just that's a lost art.
It's like one mic in a room. A lot of those records, and the mix is done by how far from the mic you are, right?
Yeah, you know, I mean, a few years later, we were touring, opening for Eric Clapton, and at one of the gigs, there was a party afterwards, and Tom Dowd was there, who was the engineer on a lot of that Atlantic stuff.
Yeah, man.
And my brother got into this, I wouldn't say argument, but a heated discussion with Tom Dowd, because Tom Dowd had, you know, moved so far away from that he was trying to explain to my brother that, you know, it can't be done. You can't make a record that sounds like that anymore. My brother said, "Yes, you can. You did it. You can do it again." And he was like saying, "Well, man, I'm only into doing," I don't know who he said, Depeche Mode or somebody like the Thompson
he got right
Twins.
into the
And he was saying, "That's what I'm into now." And my brother was like, "You're out of your fucking mind. You know, you recorded Big Joe Turner and Charlie Mingus. You should do, you know, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a learning thing that took me years, and it took working with guys like Greg Lease, you know, and then I was fortunate enough to find you know, some engineers through the years that did have a similar vocabulary where I could say,
I knew what you wanted. Yeah.
Yeah, I could say, you know, let's make this sound more like let's make it more of a King record as opposed to a Chess record,
Right.
and they would go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Or,
that
down
takes
to
some deep understanding.
Yeah, Mark Lynette I worked with for a long time, and
Yeah, he's
Mark
great,
was real good. Mark was real good at, I would say, or he would say, here, use this microphone. This is a 60s, you can get the 60s Howlin' Wolf, early 60s Howlin' Wolf sound out of this microphone. And I'd be like, okay, you're speaking my language. And so, yeah, it took me a while to learn, and and over the years, I would soak up sort of similar to whatever guitar players I saw growing up. I would watch engineers, and I'm not an engineer in anything, but I learned tricks, like we worked with, on the last Blasters album that I did, the thing called Hardline.
Yep.
We had a great engineer whose name just walked right out of my skull, but the producer was a guy named Jeff Irick. And Jeff Edel, and he engineered, and he was great. And he could make us sound, so you're talking about the song Dark Night, that was one of the songs on the record, and he finally kind of made us sound like how we sounded.
Okay.
And,
that's a real challenge with a band like that.
Yeah, but then we worked on a couple of tracks where Don Gaiman and John Mellencamp produced. And I learned a lot just from watching those two guys. Because
what kind of things?
Well, I wasn't particularly a fan of Mellencamp's work, but I was a fan of his records.
Okay.
Because he knew how to make rock and roll and rhythm and blues kind of combine. He understood dynamics. Yep. The sort of dynamics, that say the Motown house band would have, or something like that, and everything from how to do a drum loop, without the drums, they would create, instead of using a click track to keep us in time, they would create a percussion loop. And then it was real easy for us to play in time because we're playing along with this thing that's not going tick, 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 tick,
totally. Yeah. What did Mellencamp produce for you?
He produced a song called Colored Lights. He wrote and produced. He was trying to get us a hit record.
Oh, okay.
And, and it could have been a hit, I guess. Yeah. Maybe if we were better looking,
You mentioned Greg Lease as being somebody that was big for you. What did you learn from him? He taught me pedal steel, but I know his vibe is very relaxed and calm, but he's like a maestro of awesome guitar tones. And but I've never really seen him in action as a producer. What was that like for you? And I know you used him a number of times.
Yeah, well, Greg had been in my first solo band when I quit the Blasters and I joined a band called X. Around the same time, I just started a band on the side because I missed playing blues and R&B and some country stuff. When in X, even though those elements were in the music was sort of based around 8 notes, da, 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 da,
Right. Yeah.
And so I started a band, just a jam band kind of thing, and we would play in this bar from like 2 in the afternoon until like 6 in the evening. 7 in the evening, we'd drink beer and whatever. And so in that band was Greg Lease. Tony Gilkison, the great guitarist, was the other guitar player. It was me and Tony. And then Tony said, I know this great pedal steel player. Let's get him in. And so there was Greg. And then Greg and I bonded instantly because he had lived, when he was a kid, lived in Santa Fe Springs, California, which is on the other side of the San Gabriel River from Downey.
Okay.
So I had written a song that we were jamming on that was all about a kid riding his bike through the river, the San Gabriel riverbed. And Greg said, oh, yeah, I used to do that, and blah, blah, blah. And then we bonded instantly.
Oh, cool.
And so then, but as Greg, in those days, Greg was doing, country bar gigs.
Yep.
You know, 4 sets a night, 6 nights a week, you know, to pay the rent. And then, when we were out, we did a show in New York City with Katie Lang, and who's the guitar player in her band?
Was it Steve Nikleva?
No, it was the guy that produced some of the records.
Ben Mink?
Yeah. So we played this gig, and Ben Mink just like zeroed in on Greg. Can you come and do some sessions? Can you do this? Can you do that? You know, and so, you know, like a year later, Greg's in Katie Lang's band, you know, and that kind of opened his way to fame and fortune, you know.
Right.
But as Greg got more famous as a sideman and all that, we did some more records together. But then I had a terrible experience recording an album of mine called Museum of Heart. Greg, I just said, you know, next record I do, you're producing. Greg always had the good ideas.
Right.
And so one of the things Greg did for me was it was all sorts of little things, from finding out that maybe, you know, as guitar players, we always want to be an E, you know, or we want to be an A, you know, because it's just easier to play. And, you know, and those are not necessarily my vocal keys.
Okay.
And Greg was the one that kind of said, you know, you might want to do that in B flat. And that was eye-opening.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you know.
Even having played with horn players, that never came up that much, where you were flipping
I'm talking as a vocalist. And the other thing that kind of happened was I had done some shows acoustic with Richard Thompson, and I studied how he dealt with his voice.
Yeah.
And he's got a larger range than I do, but his basic range is mine.
Right.
You know, meaning he's a baritone. And I watched, you know, my experience with vocalists had always been with my brother is a holdover from the blues and R&B days of singing over the band.
Right.
You know, so the band's playing, but the singer's above them.
Yeah.
Same with when I was in X, John Doe, is a great singer who can sing over the band.
Yeah.
And so in my first solo records, I was trying to do the same thing.
Okay.
And that's not my deal, you know. And I was watching Richard Thompson, and I saw how he set his voice inside his guitar, meaning it wasn't above, it was comfortably relaxed.
Taking young James 80 for armed robbery. Shotgun blast.
Yeah, in the Blasters, we were violently opposed to things like capos because we considered it, you know, unmanly,
unrock and roll.
Yeah, unrock and roll. Even though I'd seen Johnny Guitar Watson live playing with a goddamn capo, you know,
man. Albert Collins.
Yeah, you know, and. So then finally I put a capo on my goddamn guitar and I could sing in B flat, you know, and that was eye-opening. And Greg kind of, you know, he walked me through singing into discovering my own voice, which is, you know, I'm forever in his debt.
Go with a blackjack, baby. Go with blackjack.
I'm a barroom guitar player. Most of the time. I can get pretty sometimes, but in general, I'm a barroom guitar player. So I am interested in, is my finger on the fret? Did I make that note? Shit. Fuck. I didn't make that note. I'll just turn up louder, you know. And where Greg Lease is orchestral.
Yeah, he's a finesse man through and through.
Yeah, so when you're recording with Greg, when Greg's producing, Greg's, you know, you're just, or I'm just trying to get through the song and not fuck it up, you know. And Greg is thinking 2 or 3 overdubs down the line. He's thinking that as he's playing with you, as you're tracking live.
Sure.
Greg's
Yeah.
already thinking, you know, when we get to that bridge, I think I can put a 12 string on there. You know, that's what he's thinking, and he's thinking what notes would go against this 12 string. You know, the 12 string could play, you know, the B sharp and the blah blah blah, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And I've watched him do it. You know, you get a track that you like, and I'm just like happy that I played all 5 chords. I played all 5. I didn't fuck it up. And Greg's already going, okay, we're going to add, you know, our harmonium here.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And the harmonium's going to be playing roughly these notes, and then I will play this little guitar figure against these. You know. Yeah. That was eye opening. You know? Right. Yeah. Again, in the Blasters, and even in my first solo band and stuff, it was, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, everybody jump into the free for all, you know, and that's valid, you know, that's completely valid. But Greg's approach is completely valid too.
What about working with people that came through the Blasters, like Gene Taylor and Steve Berlin? Did you learn a lot of things musically from being with those guys, or were they? Well,
Gene, I grew up with, you know, so Gene was always. For a little while, for like 6 months, we had a beat up, you know, stand up piano in our back room in our house, and Gene would, when it's a long story, but he would come over and play for like 3-4 hours. So you just listen to Gene, you know, you learn a lot. Steve produced my first solo record, and you know, Steve knows his shit. You know, but Steve and I kind of know the same stuff, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I get
it. So someone like Greg, where Steve I value as you know, I can go to Steve Berlin to this day and say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think that sucks? And Steve will say, yeah, it sucks or it doesn't suck, and I trust him 100%. You know, Well, with Greg's. Like I said, his brain works differently than mine musically.
Mm-hmm. Just jumping back to the Blasters for a sec, what led you to eventually want to leave that whole scene? I mean, I don't know if you left or if there was like a big dust up or what actually happened, but like, you know, you guys seem to be, you know, you put out a string of great records. You were certainly opening for a lot of huge, like you were playing stadium shows, obviously, and getting well known. What was your thought process in getting out of that band?
There was a lot. Part of it was my brother would have been happier, I think, being in a room full of blues.
Mm-hmm. Like something really traditional?
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of where he's at, you know. But on the other hand, you know, as much as I loved Room Full of Blues, I wasn't Duke Robillard, you know. Right. I wasn't, who's the other guy, the other great guitar player out of that band?
Is it Ronnie Earl?
Yeah, and I'm not Ronnie Earl or Duke Robillard. And so I realized early on that I was a songwriter. Uh-huh. That's where my strength lay. And I'd gotten to a point with the Blasters where if you jump around on the 3 studio albums that we did, you know, you'll see a progression where I wanted to start using all the, you know, here's a hoary analogy metaphor. I wanted to use all the colors on the palette. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to have to limit myself to certain things.
Yeah, as a songwriter, that's important.
This is a songwriter, exactly. You know, if you wake up in the morning and you have a polka going through your head, you want to write the polka.
You want to rock that polka, yeah.
Yeah, and you can't take certain things to the Blasters. When I quit the band, you know, my brother and I were fighting a lot, kind of over the direction of the band, and I kind of wanted to take it even more into, you know, just other realms. Yeah, and my brother and some of the guys maybe did and didn't, depending on what day of the week it was, you know. Uh-huh. And it just got frustrating. And then to turn around and say, oh, I've had enough of this, you know, it was really hard. But I knew as a songwriter that I couldn't write. I'd gotten to a point where I couldn't write songs for my brother anymore. I'd kind of reached that point. Yeah, well, whether you're writing for your brother or for Barbra Streisand, you've got to find the thing that the singer can relate to.
I wonder where you be. One dead road is all I see. But the kid is the witches waiting in the grass. I listen to the calls on the highway passing you.
Was it a decision that kind of blindsided them, or were they kind of expecting you to leave the band at that point?
Well, we were always fighting, you know. That was just our thing. And so in a fight would usually, you know, end with one guy or the other saying, "I'll quit this fucking band," you know. And but yeah, they were kind of. We had a really bad show in Montreal.
Oh, that'll do it, man.
It was terrible. And
just as a band, you mean, or bad circumstances?
No, the circumstances were great. It was some theater, and the Fabulous Thunderbirds were opening, and we had opened for them like 5 years before when we were just a baby band, and they were just doing Slim Harpo and Lazy Lester covers, you know,
right?
And we kind of aced them. We were all over the map. We could do a little Slim Harpo, but we'll do a little Walter, and we'll do some Little Willie John, and we'll do this, and we'll do that, you know. And hey, we've got this song called Marie Marie, and everybody loves it, and you know. And so we kind of aced them at the gigs, you know, where we opened for them. So now it's 5 years later, and they had gone through a profound. They hadn't released the Tough Enough record, but they were about to, and they had kind of morphed from being the Fabulous Thunderbirds of the early days into being a quasi soul band, you know, with great music. You know, Jimmy was at his, you know, kind of peak, and somewhere was starting to peak, and you know, Kim Wilson was, you know, a pretty good front man, you know. So they go out and they just kill it, you know. They're knocking out a ballpark, you know, and the people in the theater are going nuts, you know, and because you know it's not. They weren't playing lazy and laid back. They were doing a show.
They were giving her, yeah,
because they're doing Sam and Dave. You know, they're doing Wrap It Up, I'll Take It. Like, so this before the record was released, and they're doing Tough Enough, which was a, you know, pretty good little pop blues song. And
killer, yeah, they had that.
And so
nailed.
they're killing it. And we go up there, and you know, it just went to hell, man. You know, because some nights you have a bad gig. This was a really bad gig, and I had this French Canadian girlfriend at the time.
Oh yeah,
and she was there, and I'm dying because we're fucking up in front of this beautiful woman, and it got, you know, it was the very first song. Something happened in the first song where my brother didn't like what the drummer Bill Bateman was playing, and he started changing the lyrics to Marie Marie.
Oh my God.
To being. It was the very first song, and he's singing about the drummer can't play drums, the drummer can't keep time, and I'm getting pissed off as a songwriter, like, don't you be changing the goddamn lyrics. So I'm yelling at him. The drummer, Bill's, you know, he's got his little stick bag on his floor tom, and he's just pulling sticks out of it, and chucking them while he's playing at my brother's head, and Gene Taylor started, you know, Gene's getting pissed off, so he put his hands together, you know, and he held his arms straight out ahead of him with his hands together and just started pounding that way on the piano in the song.
God. Oh my God!
And it went downhill from there. It was like we had never played a gig before.
Yeah.
And so Gene walked off the stage finally, and he walked direct. Yeah, and he walked directly. Well, it was the end of the gig. Okay. At the end of the gig. This is true. Gene he didn't even go to our dressing room. He walked directly from the stage and onto the Fabulous Thunderbirds bus. And that was it. Gene was in the Thunderbirds now. Yeah. And then when we get backstage, I said, this is ridiculous. This is not fun. This is not why we started the band. I'm quitting. And I'm quitting for real. And I grabbed my French Canadian girlfriend and we left. Yeah. And then the next morning, I had to fly to New York to do a gig with the Knitters with John and Exene from X, this little side project we had. And they had fired Billy Zoom, their guitar player, like a day before, and I didn't know. And I show up for the sound check the next day afternoon, and John and Exene walk up to me and say, "Yeah, you want to join X?" I said, "Yeah, I just quit the Blasters. Fine, great." You know,
holy shit.
So it was like that.
So that was that. That was the last gig was in Montreal.
Yeah, I did some, you know, I did contractually obligated gigs. You know, for about another, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months, where I was doing both bands. I was touring with X and also going to do Blaster gigs. So
ooh, that would have been tough, eh?
it was heavy woodshedding. I had to learn like 32X songs in a week.
Right.
But fortunately, I'd seen them so many times, I had a vague idea kind of what to do.
This whole LA scene in the mid 80s, I guess.
Early 80s.
You know, with X and Los Lobos came out of there, and you guys, of course, Beat Farmers and Country Dick and all that. And you've had just such a big part of it. But I was just wondering if you could tell me a bit about the scene and how much you were playing back then, and what, you know, some of your favorite nights would have been with some of those people in those bands.
The main thing was that everybody kind of helped each other.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there was a magazine called Slash, a punk rock magazine, and then they decided to start a label. And their first band was a band Darby Crash had called The Germs. And the Germs album sold unbelievably well, like shockingly well.
Right.
And so then suddenly Slash was a friggin' record label, you know, like the Germs had sold 100,000 copies, you know.
Holy shit.
And Darby was, you know, suddenly a punk rock star, you know. And so then Slash asked the Germs, who should we sign? And they said, oh, you got to do X. And so then they signed X, and X, the first album sold, you know, unbelievably well, you know, close to 100.
Was that the one that Ray Manzarek did?
Yeah, Ray did like 4 albums with him.
Right.
But that was the first one.
Okay.
And so then Slash said to X, who should we sign next? And X said the Blasters. You got to sign the Blasters.
Yeah.
And so then they signed us eventually, and then same thing. They asked us, who should we sign? And we said, well, there's this band from East LA called Los Lobos that opens up shows for us. You should sign them. They're great, you know.
Yo te mando dentro de este municipio, yo te lo digo por si quieres escapar. Allá en el otro el que manda al mitoligio, nomás le aviso y te tiene que agarrar.
Like I said, everybody, you know, kind of looked out for each other.
Yeah.
And you know, some of the gigs, you know, particularly in the like 1980 or so, could get pretty violent and weird. You know, there's a lot of
like the audience, you mean?
Yeah, you know, because it was all quotation marks punk rock. You know, so
right.
The scene itself was intense and thrilling because it was a real music scene. You know, you read about you know, Kansas City in the 30s, or you know, Chicago in the 50s, or whatever, New Orleans in the teens or 20s. And this was a real music scene. There was a lot of great musicians and songwriters. All, you know, everybody from Peter Case and his Plimsolls, to Stan Ridgway and Wall of Voodoo, to X, to, you know, the Go-Go's, you know, to the Blasters, you know, and then there was like the second generation of bands that would be like, you know, Los Lobos and Green on Red, you know, that came after the first wave. But everybody kind of helped each other. And, you know, the Blasters, you know, like I said, X helped us, so then we turned around and helped Lobos. We even, you know, a few years later helped Dwight Yoakam. We took him out on tour, and he got a record deal with Warner's, you know, because the Warner's people saw him opening up at one of our shows. And
so was a guy like Dwight Yoakam kind of, even in a fringe way, welcomed into that essentially punk rock scene of the LA?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, he
was his audience crossing over?
There were people, you know, in the punk scene didn't like the Blasters, you know, so it's, you know, it wasn't like if you liked Black Flag, if you were really into Black Flag, you didn't like Dwight Yoakam. You know, I mean, let's be serious.
Yeah.
But there was enough of an overlap where, say, a band like the Blasters, we could play gigs with Black Flag because we played almost as fast as they did.
Yeah, you had the same energy. Like, it's different
Yeah.
music, but it's the same.
Yeah,
I get
and
it.
so there would be guys up there, you know, in their audience screaming "Rockabilly sucks," but then there'd be other guys flying through the air in joy, you know.
Right.
So it was just random. But no, Dwight was never really accepted by the
Okay.
by the punk rock scene. But you know, by the time Dwight came around, the battle lines had been already drawn, or the cultural battle lines, meaning, you know, with the arrival of the hardcore element.
Yeah.
Say in the late 70s, there wasn't that thing. That what there was kind of a whatever you want to do. You know, it was more like we're all oddballs and we don't fit in, no matter what kind of music you play. Because if you listen to all those bands from back then, they really didn't sound alike. The Go-Go's didn't sound like X. The Blasters didn't sound like the Plimsouls. The Plimsouls didn't sound like the Weirdos. The Weirdos didn't sound like the Screamers. The Screamers didn't sound like Wall of Voodoo. You know, you could go down the list and they all sounded different. And then when hardcore came in, as great as hardcore could be at times with Black Flag and all that, it kind of created a divide between, if you didn't play hardcore, you weren't playing punk.
Right.
And so what happened was, by say 84 or so, it got figured out that, okay, who's a roots act? You know, who's a roots rock act? Who's a pop rock act? Who's a punk rock act? You know, and so Dwight came along kind of around the time when it was roots rock. You know.
Yeah.
And
okay. I gotcha.
You know.
And so, would you have been, like, back in the day, like pre that, like in the early 80s? Would you have been playing around LA like 3, 4, 5 times a week, kind of thing, or like what sort of frequency could you actually do down there?
Usually, you know, in the early days, you could do like 3. You know, but you'd pick different parts of town because it was so big. You know, you could play Santa Monica, club bar in Santa Monica on Thursday night. You could then go to a bar in Long Beach on Friday night, and then play a gig in Hollywood on the Saturday night. You know, you could vary it up. But yeah, I mean, you could go see, you know, at the peak of the scene, you could go out just about any night of the week and hear somebody great. You know, and
what were your favorite clubs to play in at that time?
My favorite, probably all in all, was, you know, there was a club called the Starwood, and I loved the Starwood. That was like run by this gangster named Eddie Nash.
Yeah. And
as all the great music clubs of history have been run by gangsters. But the way the club was set up, it actually kind of encouraged. It's a long story. It was a great hang, let's just put it that way. And you could go there even when you weren't playing, and you could hang and talk to musicians, because everybody, if they weren't playing, they would go to the Starwood, or they'd go to the Whiskey, you know, to get drunk, to try to get laid, you know, to do whatever. But you could also talk to the bass player from such and such band, and then you could talk to guys that were playing all the different types of music, whether it was punk rock or techno, you know, early, you know, electronic art music. You could all hang out and get drunk together, and then swap stories and, you know, share things. And
are you writing much these days? Like, what's next for you? Either on a solo thing or with Phil. What are you going to be doing in the next little while?
Well, we'll see. You know, I always keep things on a we'll see basis. Throughout my career, everything's been organic. You know, like, oh, this feels natural. You know, and so you kind of slide into that, whether, you know, like when I made an acoustic record on K in California, it was just like, it just felt natural, you know, and then on later records of mine, like Ash Grove or 1111, to plug in and play loud again, you know, it's just natural, same notes. So I don't know, you know, making the 2 records with my brother felt natural and felt like we needed to do this before we died. But I think after that, probably the next thing that'll happen, will probably be a Dave Alvin record, and because I'm going out on tour, like I said earlier, acoustic, doing a bunch of acoustic shows, and then in April I'm doing a bunch of Dave Alvin shows with my band on the East Coast and in the Midwest, and you know, and then we'll see That'll probably be a Dave Alvin record, and then another Phil with Dave.
Well, thanks so much for talking to me today.
You got it,
all
Steve.
this stuff, man. I loved hearing these stories, and I'm such a fan of your work. And when I started doing this podcast, you were literally the first person that I thought of. And it's taken me a while to rope you in, but I'm so glad you agreed to do it and take the time today. I really appreciate it, man.
Well, I hope you can edit it down to where I don't sound insane. I appreciate it.
That was my conversation with Dave Alvin. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Please head over to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you next week for another episode of Music Makers and Soul Shakers. Music Makers and Soul Shakers is recorded at the Hen House Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Please visit us online at www.stevedawson.ca. Thanks always to Jeremy Holmes in Vancouver for his help with research, and to Michael Glusack for editing, music placement, and mixing.